Hi, and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we take a look at the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Dan Larrabee.
And I'm Luke DeWolf.
This is episode 12, and we'll be looking at the Skirnismal today. How are you doing, Luke?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. So the Skirnismal is it's a poem about Frey seeing the apple of his eye, the woman that he comes to love. There's different pronunciations. I always go with Gerdr, but I think she's like Gareth in the But so if you hear us saying Gareth or Gerda, it's the same person. It's actually a pretty unfortunate poem, I would say. There's a lot of things in it that are unpleasant and awful, and we'll of course be dealing with that as it comes up, and you'll know exactly what it is when it happens, because it's like off the wall, crazy bad. So just a bit before we get into it, a bit about the poem itself. It can be found in the Codex Regius, as well as in manuscript AM 748I4TO. And as always, we are using the Poetic Edda, translated by Jackson Crawford. And we'll have a link to this Poetic Edda on Amazon and to his YouTube page, because it's a great YouTube page. He's a professor of like the Norse language, and it's an amazing resource for all the Eddas and things like that. So we can't recommend it highly enough to go check that out and sort of learn exactly what the words mean and how he translated it and that kind of thing. And we've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again. The reason why we use this translation is that it's a really good translation. It's very accessible, and it also I think he's done a really good job of sort of keeping it coherent, whereas sometimes when you translate things, the language can get in the way of coherence, but he's able to keep it coherent without sacrificing the meaning. So, I mean, that's a pretty big feat in itself.
Absolutely. No, it's a great translation, great YouTube channel. Check it out for sure. Yeah, as Dan mentioned, this is going to be a different one, really interesting. Obviously, that we're continuing our series on the Poetic Edda here, and this is one of the more strange poems, definitely one of the more strange ones, and it's actually in format, it's rather different as well, because and you'll be able to tell it's probably was actually sort of set up as a play or a drama, because it's got a lot of dialogue, a lot of back and forth. And I mean, there's been other poems that have had some of that, Vafthrudnismal especially, but this is on a completely different level. It's set up almost like with scenes and things like that. So we are going to kind of be jumping through this a little bit, because this is one of the most narrative driven poems in the whole Edda, really. But then at the end of the day, there we are going to get to a section with some really
challenging.
That's a good word for it. Yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting to see how we get through that. So that's going to be a fun one. That's all I got for it. The only thing I was going to mention was a little bit about the characters themselves before we got into it, just so that we have a little bit of a grasp on it. It is all about Freyr, who is really a fertility god associated with agriculture. And that's kind of important because in the older fertility cults that this would have been probably based on, in some sense, Frey would have been one of the most important gods. He has a statue had a statue at the Great Temple of Uppsala, and fertility was one of the most important things, and he definitely symbolized that. And one of his symbols is a big penis.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, if you ever see Norse gods and one of them has a large phallus, that's Frey. And like, you don't even have to guess. It's just, that's who it is.
Exactly. And so he symbol of fertility in the literal sense. And then we have Skirnir, who is his servant. And that name translates to shining one, which is seen sometimes as a reference to the sun. And I think I want to hit on that later, possibly even after we've heard the whole story, as far as some of the metaphors between the characters and all that. But just maybe have that in your head that he might be referencing the sun.
Sounds good. And I guess we could mention a little more about Frey too. I was just thinking he was at least sometimes considered the head of the Vanir. And the Vanir being, there's the Aesir and the Vanir were a tribe that was more into the agriculture and seasons and that kind of thing, whereas the Aesir were more, I guess, like wisdom and magic and
culture versus nature.
Culture versus nature. And then they, as we heard in the Voluspa, they come together after, trading prisoners and killing each other and all this kind of stuff.
Fun stuff.
Fun stuff, yeah. Everyday, normal,
Yeah.
Bronze Age Viking stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the rest of the characters, I'm fine with introducing them as they come along.
Definitely. All right. So I will, I think without further ado, I'll start.
Let's go.
Sounds good. Frey, son of Newerth, sat on Hildaskaf and looked out over all the worlds. He looked into Jotunheim, and there he saw a beautiful woman who walked from her father's house to her own little detached house nearby. He became lovesick from the sight. Yeah. I can keep going if you want.
No, I'll jump.
Okay,
I'll jump in here. Yeah. Okay, so just because there was a little dense thing here with a lot of interesting symbols and characters and stuff, I just want to hit on that a little bit. So first, Frey, son of Newerth. So quick little introduction to Newerth. Originally kind of a god of the sea and of ships. He's got a hall that is essentially made of big planks and is the ship place, I think is the translation, right? Something like that. And so he was one of the original kind of natural gods. And then Frey is his son. So that's kind of some genealogy there. And Frey is sitting on Hlithskjalf, which is, if you remember in, I believe it was Grimnismal or Vafthrudnismal, one of the two. We originally taught it was Grimnismal because, Odin was looking out over. It's Odin's. Hlithskjalf is Odin's high place where he looks out onto the nine worlds to see everything that's going on. And so this is an interesting little thing where Frey actually has access to this setting. And Hlithskjalf, I mean, it's an important symbol you can see everywhere. It's kind of one example that I've likened it to is the eye on the top of the pyramid, which is a really common symbol. It's even on the dollar bill in the US. And to me, that is sort of a symbol of paying attention, that being the thing that unites people at the top of dominance hierarchies in general, is that they pay attention to what's around them. That's the eye at the top of the pyramid. And Hlithskjalf is similar anyway to me. So Frey is sitting on Hlithskjalf and looking out over the nine worlds.
For sure. I know in the Prose Edda, they have this story as well, and it talks about how Frey actually sneaks on to Hlithskjalf and wasn't actually supposed to be there, but Odin and Frigg were nowhere to be seen, so he wanted to catch a glimpse of a beautiful woman and sneaks on there. But there's no mention of that here. But it is, it kind of makes sense that from the top of the dominance hierarchy, he's looking at a beautiful woman, because I know for men, like, the dominance hierarchy is almost specifically designed so that you can have, the woman of your dreams. That's the, and not to say, and I don't want to give the impression either that men have exclusively created this dominance hierarchy. Women have had a lot of input as the choosers of who their sexual partners are going to be. So
right, when we say dominance hierarchy, that's the almost the natural ordering of people into hierarchies, that is the best word for it, based on competency, and it's based on having mastered a certain skill, or mastered a certain business, or mastered a certain branch of whatever mastery, and then competing within that. And so for a lot of men, that looks like a lot of physical pursuits. Sports would definitely be a big one. Anything where you can compete in, really, and then whoever is the best, that's the one at the top. And then there's also an idea of being good at the set of games, being good at as many of these things as possible, and that's the person who's really at the top of the meta game, all of the dominance hierarchies, and that's sort of the most successful person in theory. And yeah, one of the reasons for that is that the women then eventually can take from the top of that dominance hierarchy and pluck the best ones off, and then there's fewer and fewer, and we'll get into that, by the way. But they, as you said, they have their own dominance hierarchies, and then they also have they can play within the dominance hierarchies that traditionally have been mostly dominated by men, and it's an interesting situation, and it's descriptive of a lot of human behavior.
Absolutely. And I guess the archetype for that would actually be the knight who has to go and save the maiden fair from a dragon. And, actually that's a really good example, because the knight, not only is he skilled in combat, but the title of knight also offers a certain amount of, I guess, respect and honor in society. So that's like two dominance hierarchies right there. And then killing a dragon, I mean, that's sort of like, wow, that's the top of maybe all the dominance hierarchies. And then saving the maiden, who, I guess it's assumed that the maiden chooses him to marry and, have babies with. So
yeah, it's all very interesting, and this entire poem is sort of a commentary on that. I think.
Yeah, something like that. It kind of goes off in the other direction, but
yeah, and maybe to tie this back in here a little bit, like he's out there looking for a beautiful woman. Like that's the thing, and I mean, how real is that too? Like, no matter who you are, speaking from my personal experience, definitely looking for a beautiful woman was a topic of my fascination for a very long time. I was sitting on the highest perch that I could come up with, metaphorically speaking, and that was basically all on my mind. He's looking out into Jotunheim here, Freyr, and as we've talked about before, Jotunheim is the unknown, right? And I mean, that makes sense on a lot of levels. Like, generally, you look outside the known. I mean, sometimes, but the known, the tribe, whatever, would have often been mostly just your immediate family sort of thing. And even today, the closest people to you are probably your immediate family or very, very, very close friends, something like that. And we have a word for that if you marry within, close family relationships. Incest. So it's a good thing to be looking into the unknown for a lot of reasons, but he becomes lovesick from the sight of this woman, right? I mean, that's like, how real is that?
Oh, it's great. And I'm glad you brought up incest, because I have that in my note too. Just you do have to go into the unknown, because, well, you don't want to. There are very real consequences and ramifications for staying within the known.
Yeah, that's a good euphemism for all that, I think. No, so I mean, I think this sets the stage, though, right? Like it's very much talking about and Freyr as the most fertile, the symbol of fertility, like getting lovesick. I mean, this is like male instinct here. This is hormonal. This is, I don't know. I mean, I'll let this progress a little bit here, but I've got a very particular picture of Freyr in this particular poem, and I think we'll see.
For sure. So I'll move on, and I'll finish off the last paragraph of the prose part, and then we'll be going to the end of the first verse, I think, right? Okay. Frey had a servant whose name was Skirnir, and Njord told Skirnir to ask Frey what the matter was. Then Skadi said, "Get up, Skirnir, and go ask our son to talk. Find out who it is who's made him so angry."
Okay, so again, just a little introduction here. So Skadi is making her debut here, and she is the wife of Njord in this particular case. And the story of how she came to be the wife of Njord is a nice one. We'll deal with it another time, but she wasn't always the wife of Njord, and I don't believe she's the mother of Freyr. She might be, but I didn't know if that was the case. This would have been a good thing to look up, I'm now realizing. But
Well, part of the problem is there's a whole bunch of... often with the genealogy, there's conflicting reports, so...
yeah, off the top of my head, I didn't think that was the case there. But they're talking about here, Skadi is talking about here, like there's something wrong with Freyr now. And I think that paints a very specific picture of what's going on here. He's lovesick, and he's lovesick to the point of almost like being depressed, acting all sad and being depressed. And I don't know, that's just what this is telling me to start with.
For sure, kind of that moody, almost like I'm almost seeing like a 14-year-old boy who's met this like beautiful 14-year-old girl in his class, and hasn't got the guts to talk to her yet or anything like that. And then he gets home and he's all grumpy and, playing violent video games and just trying to take his mind off of it or something.
Yeah, no joke. That's exactly the image I'm kind of getting here, is moody teenager or something like that. And it's not a good look on Freyr, unfortunately.
No, it isn't. This is one of those stories where, when you see a character that you really like or care about, and they're just doing things that are making you cringe. Oh, this is a very cringy. Well, it starts off very cringy and then gets
much worse.
But there's just a lot of cringe to begin with because, it'll show up, and I think the root of it is that he has this desire that he doesn't know if he can satisfy, and he wants, and probably feels that the sacrifices he's made in order to get this desire fulfilled are worthy, but there's sort of a sense of entitlement there, not unlike Cain, where he's made these he is the god of fertility, so there's probably a bit of like, well, I am the god of fertility. I have this certain amount of power. I shouldn't have to feel this way, and I should just be able to have her.
Like, look at this big penis I've got. Like,
exactly, So, I guess let's move the story along a bit so that we can really dig our teeth into some of these more cringeworthy events.
Absolutely.
Skirnir said, "I can expect only bad words from your son if I go and talk with him, if I go to ask him who it is who's made him so angry."
Yeah, so I mean, just emphasizing the negativity of the situation again, right? Like it's sort of, he's moody. He's not going to react well if his friend comes and talks to him. It's not awesome.
Yeah, it reminds me of high school, like being at the lunch table and your friend likes a girl, and maybe you know it or don't know it, but he's just grumpy, and especially if she's like sitting beside another boy, then he's just not saying anything, just staring at his sandwich and eating. Like, bad news.
I don't have much more on that.
No, just so we'll continue on with the cringe, I think. Verse 3. Skirnir said, "Tell me, Frey, great among the gods, because I want to know. Why are you sitting alone inside the hall all day long, my lord?" And then Frey said, "Why should I tell you my sorrow, young man? The sun shines all day long, but it does not soothe my longing."
bad poetry, huh? Like, I don't know. The sun is a recurring symbol just in general, but here the usage is sort of like even the sun can't make me feel better. And I mean, again, this is just painting the picture, right? Like he's just so down in the dumps over this girl, over this lady, and apparently he can't see any way out of it. That's I think the nuance here is he can't see any way out of it, right? So that's frustrating, but it's also pretty pathetic.
It is pretty pathetic. I actually, I've got written down here, I think a lot of what we're seeing here is the kind of like the male shadow, and that it's sort of the unconscious impulses and horribleness that I would say men in particular have. I mean, I'm sure women can display this, but I think in general, this is more of a thing that men would display, or boys, sort of that moodiness about, he hasn't even been rejected yet. He's just doesn't have the fulfillment of his desire yet.
Yeah. And I mean, this almost, it's in some kind of stage where he hasn't even worked up the courage to go talk to her. He hasn't ventured into the unknown. He's looked into the unknown, but doesn't go out there yet. And very much this is a man who has some work to do.
Absolutely. A lot of work to do to integrate sort of the different aspects of his personality.
And be worthy.
Well, and that's exactly it. He's literally just sitting at home sulking. No sacrifice has even been attempted to get what he wants. So I think I'll move on so we can get to the good stuff. So verse 5, I think verse 5 and 6 and 7 actually. Yeah, so 5 to 7. Skirnir said, "Lord, I doubt that your longings are so great that you cannot tell me about them. The two of us were young together a long time ago. We can trust each other." Frey said, "In Gymir's yard I saw a beautiful woman walking. Her arms shone so bright they reflected in all the air and sea. That woman means more to me than any woman has ever meant to any young man. But among the gods and elves there is no one who would bless our marriage."
Okay, so he's explaining himself, and that's good of him. That's at least a step in the right direction here. He saw a beautiful woman walking, so okay, great. Again, solar imagery. Her arms shone so bright, they reflected into the air and sea. We've seen this in descriptions of the houses of the gods. Again, this sort of idealization, really, where it's like they're solar, they're beaming, they're bright, and so she's getting these characteristics from him anyway. And then the idea that, well, she means more to him than any woman has ever meant to any young man. Like, I mean, first of all, the exaggeration there, but also like, what guy doesn't feel that though? Like, no one has ever felt this way before. No one's ever going to feel this way again. I'm alone here. And not to make fun completely, like there's definitely a lot of kids out there who feel that way, not just for this, but for, depression and for just feeling different sort of thing. And I think the unfortunate answer is that pretty much everyone has felt exactly the way you have in one way or another. Maybe not exactly the way you're feeling it, but yeah, it's just sort of one of those unfortunate things that you grow out of if you see past your really short-term struggles, get past them, and get to the next stage of life, which is an important part of this poem, really.
Definitely, and I think that's actually a hopeful thing, that you realize that actually everyone has felt this way, and that you're not actually all that weird and freaky, and because then you can actually relate to other people and you're not in fact alone. So it's a good thing. But yeah, when you're going through it, when your brain isn't fully developed, geez. And it shows you too that this has been going on like forever, not just since we've had high school and Saved by the Bell and whatever other high school drama shows there's been. That this is how we have acted forever. So I like that. I also, there's something about it that struck me that generally when we look at becoming conscious and the painful process of becoming conscious, for men and for women, it's usually the opposite sex that will enlighten them to their many shortcomings. And I think we're seeing a bit of that here. But one of the examples is, I think it's Sleeping Beauty, who, if Prince Charming doesn't come to her and she doesn't sort of experience that kiss while she's sleeping and sort of the awakening of her womanhood, she'll just be forever asleep. And that's sort of the meaning behind that. So I think what we're going to see is some harsh light reflected back onto Frey from Gerda here. And honestly, not a moment too soon. But I think we're actually going to see a lot of sort of moving from the unconscious to the conscious, and how terrible and painful that is. So,
I think you got that exactly right, and it's a tough place to be, but it's also definitely I think it's almost something you have to go through. You know, like it's that awkward phase where you're figuring yourself out. Like babies go through this, all the little motions and things that they do, that's how they figure out the world for themselves. And if they don't kind of get to do that, they don't ever develop properly. Kids as well, like it's a whole big thing. And it's exactly right, you're developing all through high school, right? Like, I mean, that's a serious time where you honestly have to make some serious decisions about your life, and you're still developing, right? Like, that's crazy. But the only other thing that struck me here was the concept that no one would bless their marriage, and that was a bit strange to me. If anything, I think it's more speaking to his inappropriateness for marriage at this point. I couldn't really get much more out of this other than perhaps it's just she's kind of unattainable, and maybe he's putting her in that unattainable realm here. But or it's something like she is actually unattainable. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but there's something there.
For sure. I had actually just thought of it as, because she's a giant and they don't really mix all that much. But I think the his inappropriateness for marriage, I think, is a more likely explanation for it, because he's obviously not there and hasn't done anything to make himself worthy of it. So
at least not in this story. I mean, and that's all we can kind of take from it, right? Is that in this story, there is no evidence that he's done anything worthy of it. And he seems to be feeling it too. That's maybe the other thing, right? He is sad and depressed and all that. If you're at the top of the dominance hierarchy, you're not depressed. That's just in general. You're puffed up. You're the top. You know you can take care of whatever the world has to throw at you. That's even like a byproduct of having like a lot of serotonin in your system, is that like you stand up straight with your shoulders back and like you're confident and ready to go. But if you're not at the top, you are at the bottom by definition. But that's also a state of like you have trouble actually, like you curl up in a ball almost and slouch and you're depressed and all that. And it's just not a great place to be in general. And that's where he is. And so, I mean, he knows that he's on a subconscious level, if not a conscious level, that he's not really worthy here.
Definitely. And I think we can expand that to today, like with celebrities who they seem to have it all. They seem to be on top of the dominance hierarchy, but they've got the fame, the fortune, and whatever comes with that. But then they go ahead and kill themselves, and it's like, well, and you find out, oh, it was depression or something like that, and you say, well, how could that be? And it's, well, okay, they were at the top of these few dominance hierarchies, but the rest of them, they weren't at the top and felt that. So that's sort of like, that's one of the, I guess, the tragedies too of putting all your eggs in one basket kind of thing and really going to the top of one dominance hierarchy. We're trying to maintain the top of that hierarchy in your mind too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's definitely a tough place to be in, and I mean we've been having a lot of that lately, like celebrities who have committed suicide or whatnot, and then statistics say we're up this year for whatever reason in the number of suicides, at least in the U.S. And it's a lot of it brings up a lot of tough conversations, I think, for
Absolutely.
how we deal with that, right? But Freyr currently is not a good example of how to deal with that. Just
No, not at all.
moaning and groaning and stuff. So
Sort of wallowing.
wallowing, yeah, good word.
Thanks. Before I move on, I just want to mention a few things. One, we heard the name Gymir or Gimmer, and that word, that name, there's a few definitions, and it could be earthman or sort of protector or bellosote. It's interesting. Usually, a lot of times the earth is represented by the feminine, but we see here that this is a sort of a major figure that is maybe the masculine version or representation of the earth, and the father of Gerd, and who actually we should probably mention the meaning of her name is it simply means fenced in, which I've got a lot to say about that coming up, but it really it actually matters a whole bunch what her name is. So I was pretty interested in that. So I think we can go on. Okay.
Sounds good.
So this will be stanza 8 to 10. Skirnir said, "Give me a horse that will carry me through darkness and flame, and give me your sword that fights by itself against enemy giants." Frey said, "I'll give you a horse that will carry you through darkness and flame, and I'll give you my sword that fights by itself, if it is carried by a wise man." Skirnir said to the horse, "It is dark outside, time for us two to ride over dewy mountains, to rush beyond the homes of men. Either we will both come back, or the mighty giant will take us both."
So Skirnir here is playing the hero to Freyr's pathetic, wallowing, useless shell of a man.
Absolutely. It just kills me. Like the cringe this is asking your friend to go talk to that girl that you like.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's almost even worse. It's like, bro, like, come on, I'll go talk to her. But the symbolism, though, is significant. It's, first of all, it's exactly right. Darkness and flame. Like, what else is more like? This is the dark unknown, literally the dark unknown. Like it's not the good kind where it's like you maybe have a way of understanding how to deal with it, right? This is like the dark. Who's not afraid of the dark? Tons of people are afraid of the dark, like their whole lives, really. I mean, maybe not like the dark, like in your home, but like just in general, when it gets dark, like it's not great. And fire, destruction, like he's gonna go off and face some nasty things here, but maybe that's what you need to do to get the girl. And Freyr is not the one doing it.
Yeah, you just want to cringe. You're exactly right about the darkness and flame. Both of these things, like you're traveling through chaos and the unknown, and something that can harm you but can also be useful. So, like, who knows how that's going to go? And the fact that Frey gives him the sword, like that one in the Prose Edda, this sword is the one that would defeat Surt at Ragnarok because it would fight on its own. So now this is why they can't defeat Surt. Now it doesn't say that in here, but in the Prose Edda, it's very clear that now they're going to lose. But then, it's not a far stretch to look at the sword and see it as a sign of, let's say, male virility. and he's literally handing it over to his friend. Oh, come on, Frey. I'm hoping this is like a story from when he's young, and then when he grows up, he's a fertile one and like awesome, because this is not awesome.
Yeah, no. But it's still, it's kind of like, the sword is cool. It's like it fights by itself. It's a tool to tame chaos. And he makes an interesting point. It fights by itself if it's carried by a wise man. I think that's almost an admission that he's not a wise man currently. So maybe the sword is useless to him, you know?
Definitely. And I would say too that you can sort of translate that into the idea that men shouldn't be useless. They should be able to sort of fight against chaos. And I mean that very literally, like be able to fight. But the real key to being able to fight is to know when to fight and when not to fight. And I think this is sort of that next level of maturity, of wisdom. Wisdom really is that, is when it's knowing when to fight and when not to fight, and that kind of thing. So, and he's just giving it away. He's just tossing it to his friend and say, okay, you can go do this.
I mean, hopefully his friend is acting on his behalf. That's sort of what we assume here. And I mean, he seems to be, if I'm taking this to a symbolic level, he is a servant of Frey. This is, to me, in one sense, this could be the actual positive or heroic side of Frey, actually going out and venturing to do this. And I will bring this back with the symbolism of the sword and a few other things later. It's tenuous, but it's there.
Definitely. Actually, this actually makes me feel a lot better about Frey, maybe, because Skirnis, his name means shining one or bright one, and that is very much an attribute given to Frey. So maybe what we're actually seeing is like the battle between the shadow and the consciousness. And when the story is concluded and we actually get into because this story is unique in that it's actually got a narrative, and that it's actually got some surprises, I would say. And so I don't want to ruin that here. I want to discuss the metaphorical symbolism at the end. And so I'm just saying we might get to a little bit of a better place with Freyr and this entire poem at the end, maybe. Hopefully. I mean, we can't get much worse.
You're not wrong.
No.
But Skirnir is going to go out into the unknown on Frey's behalf, regardless of whether he is a symbol for the positive attributes of Frey or not. Either way, that's the situation.
This is a situation. All right. So there's another prose paragraph that I'll be reading, and then stanzas 11 to 13. Skirnir rode to Gymir's house in Jotunheim. There were fierce dogs chained up outside the fence that surrounded the hall where Gerd lived. Skirnir rode over to where a herder sat on a mound and said to him, "Tell me, herdsman, sitting on that mound and watching all the roads, how can I get past Gymir's dogs for a chance to talk with the young Lady Gareth?" The herdsman answered, "Is this your death day, or are you already dead? You'll never have a chance for a conversation with Gymir's good daughter." Skirnir said, "There's always a better choice than cowardice if you have business to take care of. One day long ago, my life was already shaped, and my fate was fixed."
Okay, so first of all, what a guy. I'll start more at the beginning here. So he rides out to Gymir's home in Jotunheim. So, okay, good. This is a good situation. He's gone out into the unknown, but, well, there's dogs all around and a big fence, right, that surrounds the house, the hall where Gareth lives. So, again, that's prescient. She's basically named for her situation. And Skirnir is wanting to obviously get get past all these defenses, which I think almost literally, like, the herdsman here is saying you're never going to get a chance. These sound like the barriers that a father would set up around his daughter, like almost on a societal level is kind of where I take that to. Just in general, girls are set up with all of these defenses and barriers around them, and in some ways rightly so, because they are actually unable to physically defend themselves, which is another thing that we'll hit on. At least unable to physically defend themselves against a man who has violent intentions, right? So there's all these defenses around Gerdr, but then Skirnir says, well, okay, there's all this stuff in my way, but what am I going to do? I'm just not going to try? Like, good for him, right?
Oh, definitely. I actually like the dialogue in this too. It's kind of action movie a bit. Like, is this your death day, or are you already dead? To me, that's just like, are you stupid, or like, do you want to die, or are you already dead and you don't care? And then, Skirnir says, my life is already shaped and my fate was fixed. Like that's kind of an epic response. It does actually show too the sort of the idea of fate in the old Germanic and Norse culture, that you didn't necessarily know what your fate was, or it wasn't that you didn't have free will, I guess. That's not what I'm trying to say, is that, everything was predetermined, but you wanted to get to a place where you loved your fate and that you would go out and meet it because you didn't have control over it. So why would you worry about it? You're going to die somehow. Well, okay, if I'm going to die somehow, then I'm going to do all this stuff. Because, like, what difference does it make if you're going to die at the age of 80 from a disease? If you go out and do all this stuff, you're still going to die then, right? If that's your fate. So,
yeah, exactly. It's a really positive attitude, and it's telling as to the way they saw fate, because you could go all deterministic on this, but it's almost, to me, it's a very positive view of determinism, because it's like, well, hey, if everything is all set already, I might as well have this awesome life and do all these things, right? It's the opposite of sort of a depressed determinism, which is almost an atheistic nihilism that we see today, where it's like, there's no point to anything, therefore why should I do anything? It's, well, if everything's already decided, why don't I just have an awesome life? That's a pretty good idea, I think.
Definitely. It's not as flippant as YOLO, where you only live once, but it's not nearly as dour as, no, you only live once. It's like, no, you only live once, so live. Yeah, so I liked it. Yeah.
It's healthy, and I mean, take whatever view of life, of the world you want, and I mean, take any view of determinism, free will, or whatever that you want. If there's free will, then okay, like, why don't you choose good things then that could put you on an upward trajectory, right? But if you believe in determinism, because this is a big debate, this is a huge debate, really. Sam Harris is one of the bigger names who believes that the world is fully deterministic, like everything is predetermined, fairly literally on a biological level almost. Well, I'll let him explain himself if you want to look up his work, sort of thing. I'm by no means an expert in what his belief on determinism is, but that's the gist of it, that everything is determined. Even if you do believe that, right? This is saying go and still try and still do stuff, and it puts a positive spin on it. It's like, even if everything is predetermined, well then I should make the predetermined choices to do something positive, and then I'll end up having a better life for it. And I think the argument is something like, you are already going to make that decision positively because of all the things that have happened to you in your life and all the way on back. But still, that's going to work out better for you than the person who goes and wallows in their life and doesn't ever do anything because nothing is worth it. And so take whatever view of it you want, but at least here it's saying something like, go live life, live it well, no matter what. Well, no matter what isn't in your control, you're still trying to have a good life, an awesome time, and there you go.
For sure. And it's something we see in the Havamal as well, a lot of times. So again, I've said this a few times, but I really like when you see things in the Havamal coming through the stories, because then you know that it actually was this value that the society had. It wasn't just it wasn't like how things should be. It's no, this is actually something that we do see in the society being practiced and carried out. So, and I think the only other thing I wanted to mention is kind of a small thing, but I find the idea of a herdsman kind of interesting, because it's kind of the least amount of order you can have with it not being chaos, because they're controlling, in some cases, like docile animals like sheep or cows, but they're still animals. And, they're often out in the field, and that's why you're sort of there, is to let them live in chaos, but more control than that, so you can fend off the wolves and whatever. But you can almost see I'm trying to think of the spectrum of traveling into chaos, and then as you start coming through the other side, you start seeing more and more order as you progress. And then, no, I think that was just sort of something I'd noticed, that he's going somewhere where there actually is a lot of order, and purposely so, as you're saying, for the protection of Garth, because, as a society should protect their children and daughters, and yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I like you tied that in together, and I mean, what struck me there actually was that this is a pocket of order between a big space of the unknown of chaos, right? And so, I mean, that's how society has really organized itself in general, is pockets of order with chaos in between. And yeah, interesting. I don't have much more on that than that, but interesting. That's how society is ordered. And I mean, maybe it paints a picture of the giants in general as doing things very similarly to the gods. And it shows how they're not actually all that different, which, they intermarry and they get together a lot, and some of them are friends. It's, yeah.
For sure. And I think it sets up the idea that whatever journey Garth goes on, she's actually going to have to cross through chaos to get to Frey as well. So there's sort of chaos in the middle, and order on both sides. And in a case for certain romantic love, there is that you sort of meet in the middle and try and figure out how to navigate out of the chaos. I would say that's like the rose-colored glasses portion of like a new relationship, where you don't for one, I don't really enjoy that part, because everything is just a flutter and you don't know if you're coming or going, and everything's so wonderful, but also what if it just disappears and it's terrible and you feel sick all the time, but also like elated. It's exhausting. And I know the soup of chemicals in your brain, you're pretty much insane. Like a lot of your reasoning faculties have gone out the window.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's bonkers. So, yeah, that's why I much prefer the later stages, when you're comfortable with the other person. And yeah. So I think we're kind of seeing that where on several different levels, where there's going to be both sides journeying into chaos.
Good point.
All right. I guess I'll move on to stanza 14. Garth said, "What is this noise I'm hearing in our halls? The earth trembles and everything shakes in the home of Gymir." A servant girl said, "There is a man outside. He has stepped off his horse, and he's letting it feed." I guess I'll keep going because there's not much happening. Garth said, "Ask him to come inside into our hall and drink the splendid mead, though I fear that he may be the one who killed my brother."
Okay, this one has a few interesting things. I'll start with the noise. The earth is trembling. I think this is just saying Skirnir has come to disrupt the order that has developed. And I mean, I think that says something like a romantic suitor in general is going to disrupt your life in general. Man or woman, whatever you're into, a romantic suitor is going to disrupt the order that you've developed for your life. I think that's what the trembling earth is kind of getting at here.
Absolutely. I think that's a great observation, because it is absolutely true that when you could be minding your own business and see that person, and then you're thinking about them all the time and not sleeping and all that kind of stuff. So, no, exactly.
And I think the implication here is that, maybe there's some reciprocal things here. I hate that I'm kind of going to, the only way this entire thing makes sense is if Skirnir is kind of the positive aspect of Frey, and why would there be reciprocal anything of blah, blah, blah. But I'm running with it. So that's okay. So I think it's sort of like there's some reciprocal feeling, at least a feeling of, something's up. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I think too, something is up, and I can see it too, that it's sort of that warning sound of when, the unconscious part of you is about to be awakened up and things are happening, but you don't really know what it is yet, but you can kind of feel like, something has changed or something is about to change. And I think we all get that sense a lot of the time, especially with a big change. You can kind of feel it, and you can kind of see like, something's changing right now, but you can't see what it is, because you don't know what's going to be changed. You don't have that foresight. Unfortunately, I mean, that would be pretty great, but yeah. So stuff's about to happen.
Yeah, and then I think here the other side of it too is that Gerdr says, ask him to come inside. She's inviting him in, Skirnir, to engage in hospitality, which we have touched on a whole lot. I think the metaphor, if we're going really high level here, it's the metaphor for the meeting of people in general, and the meeting of stranger and host, guest and host. Yeah, stranger and known, guest and host. It's inviting people from the unknown into your life in general. And I think what that says here is that, Gerdr is protected by all of these things, right? She's protected by fence, dogs, that's flame and darkness all around there, and the chaos and all that too. So she's heavily protected. She's the one who has to invite Skirnir in. She has to invite this unknown thing that is going to possibly disrupt her world. And I mean, she even says it. He may be the one that killed my brother. This is actually an unknown statement. People don't know, like scholars don't know what that's referring to as far as specific mythology goes. They don't know. There's no other mention of her brother anywhere else. This is almost like an offhand line. So that says to me that that would be metaphorical, sort of like this person might be dangerous. This person might harm me, or might have already harmed me somehow, if that makes any sense, but she's still inviting him in. And I think that goes beyond a social norm of hospitality, which it was, but it goes even on a psychological level. It goes into, you have to invite the person in. Like if you're not receptive to someone's advances in general, even if you might think they're awesome or whatever, like nothing's going to happen, right? You have to invite that in yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. Oh, absolutely. So even with chaos, like we've talked about it many times, how it's better to invite it in as a friend so that you can deal with it on that level, rather than try and hide it away behind dogs and, fences and your father and serving girls and all that kind of stuff. So it's really good actually that she's inviting him in. The line about whether or not it's the killer of her brother, I actually looked at the other side where, like, who else is Frey killed? And there was a frost giant named Belly that he killed with an antler. So that could be it. Well, again, like exactly what you said, they don't know, but it could be that. It could also, and it doesn't say here, but maybe Skirnir killed the herdsman, and we just didn't. They don't even really allude to it. It's just so it is kind of this mysterious line that we don't really have any solid explanation for.
Yeah, again, we've touched on this from the beginning here, where there's a lot of this assumed knowledge. This is probably one of those things where this is a reference that they assume that the audience is going to get, and I think this even emphasizes how this is like a play or a drama. There's TV shows and things like that rely on topical societal references, and they don't last past 10, 15 years sort of thing, because it's like, well, who knows what the heck that means anymore? And we're talking 1,000 years ago now. So, yeah.
Definitely. Well, I think I'll move on to stanzas 17 and 18. Gerdr said, "Are you of the Aesir or the wise Vanir, or one of the elves guessed? Why have you come over the great flame to see our home?" Skirnir said, "I am no elf, nor one of the Aesir, nor one of the Vanir, though I have come over the great flame to see your home."
So this one sounds obvious, but I think this is important to Skirnir's symbol, which again conflicts with my idea that he might be a hypostasis for Freyr. He's specifically saying he's not one of the Aesir nor one of the Vanir. So okay, that's interesting. It does point to him possibly being symbolic of the sun specifically, because the sun is not one of the Aesir nor one of the Vanir. Okay, but then the idea of coming over the great flame. First of all, cool.
Definitely.
What kind of imagery is that? Come over the great flame to our house. Like, that's significant. But, again, it underscores the depths of the unknown that would have had to be faced. And maybe it underscores the depths of the unknown that you in general, that a person has to face in order to communicate with the object of their affection.
Definitely. It's sort of this idea that it's the great chaos that you have to go through to talk to someone that you like. Now, well, again, if Skirnir is sort of a facet of Frey, then that makes more sense, because, like, if you're talking to a girl for your friend that you don't really like care about, then it's super easy because you don't care about it. But I do. So far, so good on the Frey Skirnir sort of combination, I think.
Combination, symbolic parallel, like it's clear enough that they are two separate characters, but it's the symbolic parallel that, yeah, I do want to emphasize that. I'm not ignoring that these are separate characters with separate names, but we are trying to dig into the psychological and archetypal significance here, and that's what I'm drawing out of it. It doesn't make as much sense without that, but
But who knows? This is just our best guess, I would say, because and then it gets murky, like really quick and really murky. So the only other thing I'll add, actually, before I move on, is that we're seeing a pretty great example of hospitality. She's asking about him, and he's telling, so that the whole idea of guests listening to the host and the host listening to the guest and all that kind of stuff. Again, these are things that would have just been so normal and commonplace that it wouldn't have been important. This is just how a normal thing would happen. It'd be like us telling a story about, driving. We don't have to tell you about how cars were made or anything like that. It's just a very common occurrence. But because we're so separated from the time, it's interesting to see how commonplace it was and how normal and sort of unmentioned it goes, even though we have this. So, All right, so back to the poem, stanza 10. Actually, was it 10 to...
That's a 9.
That's a 9. Geez, my glasses are dirty. That's why Geez. Okay, so we're doing 19 to 22, I believe.
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. So Skirnir said, I have 11 apples made all of gold. I will give them to you, Gareth, to buy your love, so that you will pledge to live happily with Frey. Gareth said, I would never accept 11 apples as the price of my love for any man, not even for Frey. I will never marry him so long as we live. Then Skirnir said, I will give you the ring that Odin placed on his young son's funeral pyre. 8 just like it drop from it every 9th night. Gareth said, I would never accept that ring, even if Odin did place it on his young son's funeral pyre. I have no lack of gold in the home of Gymir to share with my father.
All right, so now we're getting into, I think, a description of how courtship happens. And it's messy, it's ugly. It's not exactly the right word. Crude. That's definitely the word I'm looking for here, where it's like, here are some gifts. No, I don't accept your gifts. But there's some interesting symbolism to, first of all, what the gifts are, and then the reasons why she is rejecting them. And honestly, some of this stuff is the only reason why some of the later poem makes sense to me. So first of all, the 11 apples. There's some confusion here as to whether... There's some possible confusion in the translation as to whether it's 11 or a word that sort of translates to something to do with life. And so either way, this seems to be a reference to the apples of Iduna, which is a goddess who basically keeps these trees, which have these golden apples, which give everlasting life. And that's how the gods stay immortal. So that's a cool story just on its own here. But this is almost like the ultimate thing. I will give you everything for your sustenance to buy your love, something like that. And it's a gift. It's a concrete thing being offered to this woman. In exchange, you have to love me, sort of thing. And so she says she's not going to marry him as long as we live. First of all, the gift being offered here is very, very specific symbolically to, like, she's rejecting eternal life. That's weird. To me, that's something, at least on a symbolic level, where it's like, that's something you would probably want. That's something that indicates that this person is probably a pretty good catch, sort of thing. But then if you read between the lines here, these gifts sort of seem to be like sweeteners for a guy who doesn't necessarily stand on his own, right? He's got to give gifts in order to make himself look better. And maybe she sees past that. Why do you have to give such an extravagant gift when, why would you do that if you can kind of stand on your own here? But then she says she'll never marry him, right? That's interesting. It's almost speaking to the irrationality of love, which I think we can probably agree is a pretty irrational thing, for better or for worse.
Which in itself is irrational, right? Yeah, no, definitely it is irrational, and yeah, I think there is something to the idea that Frey is having his friend give these gifts that seem pretty awesome, but okay, why is your friend giving them? And, what's wrong with you that you need to give these gifts to make to make me like you, kind of thing.
Well, and then he just escalates the gifts, right? So first of all, him having these golden apples, pretty likely all the gods have access to them. Having the ring that Odin put on the funeral pyre of Balder, pretty unlikely that he would have that. Pretty darn unlikely. This is most likely I won't even say more. This is referring to the mythical ring Draupnir, which is self-replicating, as it says. It drops more and more wealth symbolically or literally as it goes. And I mean, these self-autonomous things, the self-autonomous sword that can kill things on its own, right? This gold that replicates itself, the goat that makes everlasting mead from its udders all the time, the pig that always refreshes itself for meat at Valhalla. These things were obviously really, really sought after because of all the work that has to go into every little thing, right? And so something like this would have been an extremely high gift. He probably doesn't have that, though. Odin, like how would he have the ring that Odin put on Baldur's funeral pyre, which in this timeline is sort of, it could both be in the past and in the future at the same time, this event. It's a weird sort of thing here. All these events get jumbled up and there isn't really one cohesive timeline of events happening one before the other for a lot of these details here. And so this story could be before, it could be after, but it's just known in general mythologically that there was this ring that got placed on the funeral pyre. And how the heck would Frey have that? He's just escalating into things that are impossible for him to have. Like what guy wouldn't do that, right? Like, you're not going to accept this. Oh, well, how about I escalate to this thing? Well, maybe I can get that for you, or maybe I can whatever. He's getting desperate. It's, again, not a good look.
No, definitely. And I'm going to sort of weave in another, I guess, plot line, but I want to run it. I want to run it parallel to yours because I have a lot to say coming up about these gifts and how Skirnir reacts to the rejection. But I want to bring up. I kind of looked at it from, I guess, a different way from Gerdr's perspective of if she's fenced in, protected by dogs and fences and her father. I'm going to assume that she's maybe overprotected and that there's probably a level of unconsciousness in her. And so we have Skirnir here offering these things. So, the apples of immortality. Well, to me, she just sort of rejects it without, I'm not going to marry him for 11 apples or life apples as long as we live. It almost seems to me that there isn't necessarily an idea or understanding of life and death and the value of that. So she hasn't reached that point where she's kind of living with the knowledge that one day she will die. Very similar to, I guess, Christianity and Judaism with, the idea that once they bit into the apple, they were able to see their nakedness and their vulnerability. Well, she isn't even there yet where she can see this as protection against her vulnerability. And then with Odin's ring, it's interesting because she mentions that she doesn't need, she has no lack of gold because of her father. And that to me, it brings up a lot of the anima and animus in relation to consciousness, because so we've said this again before in other episodes, the anima and the animus is the masculine and feminine in everyone. And for men, their job in life is usually to integrate the anima, which is the feminine part of them. And it's usually influenced or represented by their relationship with their mother. And then for women, it's the animus, and it's usually represented by the relationship with the father. And so what I'm seeing here is sort of an unhealthy attachment, or not even unhealthy, but just an unconscious attachment to her father, because everything is provided for her. She doesn't know that she has to go out and sort of go forth and integrate the masculine part of her. So, and that usually is the going forth part, whereas the feminine is often well, I mean, we see it all the time. It's kind of it can be a homemaking. It's kind of, there's sort of a mysterious element to it. There's a nurturing aspect to it rather than sort of the male, like go forth and, this is going to be flippant, but like go forth and burn things, that kind of thing. Like it, you know, so that's what I'm seeing in this, is that Skirnir is offering consciousness to Gerda, and he's saying like, oh, you're gonna get these life apples and you'll be immortal, and you're gonna get this gold ring that keeps replicating. Like, you know, after every 9th night, you're gonna get 8 more rings. And Gerda doesn't know enough to be like, hey, you know what? Like, things are good right now. Why would I don't need more. Everything I have right here is good.
No, that's a great point here, and you know what? Looking at it from the opposite perspective is important here, and you're right that it will tie into it. I'll only make one kind of point here, is that maybe the ring is a symbol of, you know, well, her potential partner going out and making a living. You know what I mean? Like,
I like that.
He's going to bring back the gold every night, and hopefully multiply that, and that is an ideal. So I'm getting maybe a better image of what these gifts actually mean here, especially in the context of how you put it, where it's like, these are what I can offer you if you come outside of your father's house, outside of this protection. And she's saying no. And this is going to paint I had this symbolic connection, like what's going to come later. There's some, I won't call them obvious, but I definitely have a symbolic interpretation of what's going to come later. This just reinforces it. So,
awesome.
We'll touch on, maybe we'll reference back to these ideas of, you know, the life that can be provided outside of this, the life that is possible outside of this. I don't want to necessarily hem this in terms of, oh, you know, this woman, she still has to be provided for in all things, sort of thing. Like, you know, that's on the symbolic level here, but this is more like what's being offered. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't the male suitor offer, like, here, I'm going to do everything for you. Like, I am lovesick for you. Here, I'm going to provide you with everlasting life and multiplying gold. Like,
exactly.
So again, this is more just me saying you got to take it to a symbolic level, and this isn't to say that should be that's the only outcome for a guy and a girl sort of thing, right? But it's on a symbolic, psychological level, it's a very kind of common thing. That's my point.
Absolutely. And I think in just a few minutes, we're going to see, unfortunately, sort of the very common reaction to having gifts of, you know, life and wealth being rejected. And it, at the time of the recording of this podcast, like, we're seeing examples of it too often. And I guess I'll just go on so that we can, because it's like, this is the part where it stops being cringy and gets ugly. And to be honest, like, when I was reading this, I had a hard time sort of getting past just the face value of it, because it was like, well, that's just awful. Like, how can you find a silver lining in this? But it's not, and it's not finding a silver lining. It's going into the symbolic nature of it, I think. And if you look at the story rather as a symbol than a how-to guide, then I think we're better off. But
do not use this story as a how-to guide. Oh my goodness, that would be terrible. Do not do that. We are not advocating for anything in this story. That's not a joke.
No, actually, I guess even before we get into it, I knew we were going to have to say this at some point during the episode, and I wasn't sure where, but this is as good as any. Yeah, this is not a how-to. We're not advocating it. If this were happening in real life and not, if it wasn't symbols, if this was happening in real life, we're like, to a friend, we'd be calling the cops. We'd be, hiding them away. Like a lot of bad stuff would be happening. So without further ado, and it's verse 23 and 24. Back to the poem. Skirnir said, "Do you see this sword, girl, this slender, pretty sword, which I have in my hand here? I will cut off your head from your neck, unless you go along with me." Gareth said, "I will never endure the threats of any man, and I think if Gimr finds you here, you brave men will come to blows."
Just had to give it a voice. You gave it a cringy voice. Yeah. No, but for real though, like turning to threats, that seems to be the frustration and the anger of rejection. And I mean, certainly some people handle rejection better than others, but this is almost like a worst case scenario. And I mean, this is like just that resentment that can build up from being rejected. And it's that resentment that comes from blaming the other person instead of looking at yourself for what you might be doing wrong. That's the whole key here. And I think I'm going to emphasize that more than once the rest of this way here, because that is the difference. And this is Skirnir, and therefore, well, oh man. And if this is Skirnir doing this, I mean, if this was supposedly the positive aspects of Freyr, none of this is good.
No, here's the, and I'm going to use air quotes if you're not watching YouTube, but I'm air quotes. The only way I can sort of jam this in as Skirnir still being like the positive, his name means bright one. So he's shining the light on the unconsciousness of Gerd, which is painful and awful and brutal and rough. And I take the threats he's making and is going to make as sort of the warning of this is what will happen if you remain unconscious. And I don't feel like I'm grasping at straws here to make this story okay. I think that is at least part of the point. But man, it's hard to.
No, it's like instantly there's rejection, and then it's like, well, I'm gonna kill you. Like if you don't come along with me, I'm gonna kill you. Very very much an attitude of if I can't have you, no one can. And I mean, on some level, I'm not defending this, but on some level, there's sort of like that. That's just that competition instinct, like. You want to take out a potential for someone else out of the pool, and okay, maybe that's some kind of a primal instinct here, but that's not great. And to her credit, Gerd weathers it. Maybe whether it's just out of something to her character, or she's secure in the idea that she's protected. And again, here by the order that has been built up around her, but also she references her father, like, here, I've got this. My father will come and defend me. Like, there we go. Again, it also illustrates the relative weakness, physical weakness of women compared to a man who's on a violent rampage here. And I mean, that's just sort of a biological fact, whether you find that unfortunate or just a fact of life. I mean, there's not a lot of women that could take on basically any man in a physical altercation. There's some exceptions. There's certainly some ladies who could completely destroy me personally, but I'm a bit wimpy currently. So, but
No.
but most men with their relative strength and size could completely overpower most women. That's just a reality.
For sure. I love the symbolism here with the. Maybe that's a weird thing to say about, I love the symbolism here, but first, the fact that Skirnir has the slender, pretty sword in his hand ready to go, again, I'm definitely taking a view of a sword being a symbol of male virility and power and sexuality. that is sort of what happens after rejection and you take it badly. It's sort of like, well, actually, we mentioned it earlier, like with Frey being like, well, like I'm the god of fertility. Like I've got a giant phallus. Like why wouldn't you want to, like, why do I have to chase after you kind of thing, right? I think there is sort of that entitlement, and it's sort of the same thing that makes men virile, like testosterone is what makes them dangerous and what would make them, kill a woman so that another man couldn't have them. It's, it's sort of the reality of the situation. And when we see, and as of the recording of this, we have seen in the last few years a few examples of men who have felt rejected by women going on killing rampages. This is where it comes from. This is Cain in the Bible. This is Panzram.
Yes. Oh yeah. That guy is like nuts and dark and ended up being like abused in foster homes and stuff like that. And then he just wanted to rape and kill as many people as he could. Exactly.
It's that vengeance against existence itself. And I think we're seeing that because he's willing to kill the object of Frey's affection that, he was living and dying for. No one else had felt like this. Like this is literally, I think, as dark as it gets.
Well, not here though. I mean, come on.
No, it gets worse. But sort of the sentiment, the sentiment is sort of the bottom of the barrel because you're going to be killing that which you supposedly love, that what you want.
Right. Exactly. It's a dark emotion, a dark place. But you're right that it comes from testosterone, which, for all the talk about toxic masculinity or whatever, I think a lot of that is blamed on what is essentially a natural thing, which is testosterone. It's a hormone. It's something that is biologically produced, and how we deal with that as a society is important. And emphasis on as a society, it's a social problem, not a, these men who have a testosterone problem need to get themselves under control, because that doesn't work. And we'll see why.
For sure. And this is again, I've mentioned this before, but this is the sort of problem of society. Like the Republic by Plato is specifically about how do you deal with men's testosterone, and how do you direct it so that instead of being the one to go after, a woman and threaten her with death if she doesn't come back and, love you or your friend, you'd be the one who would defend her against that man. And actually, I would say it shows Gumir in a good light, because she knows that she can rely on her father to defend her. So we actually have a pretty good example. So we have a god here who is just doing everything wrong. And the unknown, and oftentimes the enemy in the story is the Gymir, the Jotun, is actually coming off pretty well as how you should behave in society. Now, he may have been a little overprotective of his daughter, maybe, but he's definitely, well, when you see this, it doesn't seem all that overprotective, actually. But there is a level of that, fathers should protect their daughters. Well, protect their families in general. But in this case, it is a good thing that he's protecting his daughter to the degree that she knows she can rely on him. And I mean, it's a stereotype and a cliche about, daughters and fathers, right? And the type of men they're attracted to. So I would say Gymir has actually done a good job of being a father. And because of that, Gerd is actually able to stand up to Skirnir and say, your threats aren't going to persuade me, because I'm not all that threatened by you.
Yeah, the threats aren't effective, which is, you can take that to an extreme where it's like someone in a really bad place could take that to a violent end, which again is kind of what we've seen with some of these attacks lately. But in general, I think that's meant to diffuse. That's actually sort of like, yeah, you're not all that much, right? And the societal aspect too, it's like, yeah, this overprotectiveness might not be ideal, but it's how we protect our loved ones and our vulnerable ones from violent people who want to do us harm. Like, what's the alternative? I'm serious. Like, what's the alternative? I don't think we've found one. We have to protect ourselves from those who want to destroy us in some way, or else we're just going to be overrun. I say that generally, but also on kind of the micro level, on the level of the family, on the level of society, putting up protections through norms against young men, which absolutely I would say is, no, not I would say it. That's the most dangerous part of society is young men.
Oh, no doubt.
For better or for worse, right? So it's like dangerous in a sense that it could be harnessed. That's like, you can harness that for good things, but you can also have very, very bad outcomes like this, is
Absolutely.
what I'm saying.
And I guess the last thing I'll say, if we're looking at it as an awakening of the consciousness, I see Gerd falling back to her father again. So saying, things are fine. I don't need to wake up. And part of this is, I would say maybe I don't need to wake up to the dangers that men pose, or life in general poses. But in this, I mean, men are dangerous. I have no problem saying that. I don't think there's I'm sure there are people maybe like listening to us right now who would say like, oh no, men are fine. It's like, no, like we are dangerous, and it's the proper direction of that ability to be dangerous that is what makes you a good man, or Skirnir here.
Yeah, and I mean, I would almost say, for all of what I personally believe, that it's on the onus of the individual to kind of get themselves in order, sort of thing, and that's absolutely true. It also is counterproductive to just say every individual man who has these feelings is to blame for it and has to just sort themselves out. There also has to be that societal support where it's like, yeah, we have to have, first of all, this layer of protection around it, but then also ways of kind of getting out of that phase in a productive manner.
Definitely, because you don't want to squash it. You don't want to get rid of it. You want to direct it. That's the only way you can deal with it effectively. Otherwise, you'll have young men growing up to either resent the sort of the feelings of adventure, and in Greek they call it thumos, spiritedness. You don't want them growing up to resent that, because that's what poisons them, and then they unleash it, which you don't want. You want them to be able to engage with it and use it for the proper ends.
Yeah, and then, I mean, I think that's just the roadmap, right? Is that and I'll go on a micro level. If you are thinking that maybe you're in this kind of crappy spot sort of thing, and there's all this violent rage, whatever going on, harness that into something as simple as lifting weights or something like that, and just harness that into something productive, which will be productive for you. That's one example, but it's something that can work, and something that can eventually improve your life significantly. And that's what you as an individual can do to mitigate the effects of what would be occurring naturally. And then, maybe that's a commentary on society where there's so many guys who just don't seem like they've got any kind of direction in life, and maybe that's the point, is that there's no direction. It seems like there's no point in even having any direction, and I think that's kind of the answer, is get some direction. Like, go and at least try to do something, and by doing that, by getting some success under your belt, then you'll feel better, and life will be better.
Definitely. And lifting weights is actually a great example, because it's so simple, but it's actually effective. This isn't just like a throwaway suggestion. It works. Virtually every guy I know who's lifted weights has better channeled their spiritedness through it. Like it is a real thing, and it doesn't really matter how far down the hole you are. Like, you know, lifting weights or exercise in general will definitely take you out of it. So.
Well, yeah, and somewhat counterintuitively, if you have this image of, you know, gym rats who get super amped up and aggressive and all that, and like, ooh, pump, pound your chest sort of thing, they're doing that in the gym. And that's the point, is that they're getting out a lot of that aggression kind of in that situation, and they're actually like releasing and somewhat counterintuitively, again, it's like they're getting increased testosterone levels, but they're also channeling that into something. It's there's quite a lot to it. It's a good thing to go get some exercise, go lift some weights. This is just one example. Go do something though. That's sort of also the point, you know?
Exactly.
It's again just kind of me saying that there's things you as an individual can do, but there's also kind of that there needs to be that societal side of it too, because it's not, as much as I would like to say it's all about what you as an individual can do and how great that would be if everyone were to kind of take that message and run with it. That's not realistically going to happen. Society does have to have some protections when things go wrong.
Oh, absolutely. There has to be protections. And ironically, or not even ironically, appropriately, it'll be the men who've properly directed their spiritedness who will be doing the protecting. And no, I really like what you're saying, where society needs to sort of openly value the proper direction or directing of the spiritedness and the testosterone. And to be honest, I'm not sure they do right now. I think they're more in a place where they want to squash it. And that's not you can't repress it. It is sort of testosterone is specifically there to fight against repression and oppression. That's why young men go off to war and think it's going to be a great adventure, and not even after they've been told like it's not, you know, it's horrifying. No, they go off because they have that spiritedness. So.
If you listen to Jocko Willink at all, he says it's the best time he's ever had in his life is his time in Iraq. So it's like, and that's just one example.
Yeah, exactly. And that, if you want to see how to properly direct spiritedness, listen to the Jocko podcast, because every week it's like 3 hours of, and it's funny, it's 3 hours of like an interview or he looks at a book about a guy who went to war. And it very often starts out with this guy, like this kid who had a lot of energy and then got involved in sports at school. Or if he didn't, he was kind of a rebel, like Jocko himself. He was kind of a rebel. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, what are you rebelling against? Like, what do you got? And then for him, going into the military was that the ultimate rebellion for his group of friends. So, but yeah, it's a great podcast to learn about how to properly direct that testosterone, that aggression, that spiritedness.
We'll definitely put a link below in the description. We referenced Jocko a fair bit, but in this case, he seems particularly prescient. So, yeah.
For sure. I actually didn't have him in my notes. This just came up organically.
Absolutely. I didn't have him in my notes either.
Shall we march forward into the darkness?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Because it's only going to get worse.
Much worse.
And this is verse 25 and 26. Back to the poem. Skirnir said, "Do you see this sword, girl? This slender, pretty sword, which I have in my hand here? Your old father will bend his knees beneath this blade. I'll be the death of your father. I will beat you with a club till I tame you, girl, till you go along with my wishes. Then you'll go to a place where no one will ever see you again."
I'm resisting my urge to make a joke about your reference of the sword to male virility, and then he's going to beat her father to death with the sword. I'm resisting the urge. I'm not going to make that joke.
I actually have a bit to say about that, though.
Yeah, well,
I'll let you go, but then I'll circle back.
I don't want to make a crude joke here, so it's funny, but it's also really not great. I don't know. He's just amplifying the resentment is intensifying. He's not taking rejection well. He doesn't like that she didn't respond to his threats. None of this is good. I don't know. None of this is good.
No, it's bad, and it's again with the idea of because you brought up male virility and the sword. When I was reading it, and maybe this is a look into my psyche that we don't want to see, but who knows? It reminded me actually of like a father giving away the bride at a wedding. And you might be, well, Dan, how do you get there? But just the idea that one man who is charged with the protection and sort of all the masculine, I guess, duties that a father would have or a man has, except for the sexual part. And that, well, I guess Freud would probably argue with that. It looks a lot different, but I guess Freud would argue that there's sort of every relationship has a sexual component, even in the family, but it would look a lot different, like within the family than without the family. So, but it's the idea that the father is now sort of gone, and this man who has a sword and is sort of holding it in his hand next to Gerd is sort of the new man in her life. So that's sort of where I was going to go with sort of holding the sword, and that's how I get to the father giving away the bride. Not that, because I mean, there's a few jumps there. If you just heard that, you'd be like, "Is Dan a psycho?" And
well, I mean,
yeah, well.
No, Dan's not a psycho, but the metaphor, I mean, on the face of it, it looks nasty and gross and crude, but then it makes sense. It's like taking over. I mean, really, yeah, that is what it is like kind of overcoming the monstrous, and I'm choosing that word specifically, like the monstrous shadow of what you have to live up to for any father-in-law. You know, if you are the man, like, and you're looking at your prospective bride, her father is going to be this towering figure that in her life that you have to measure up to and beat, you know, and that's, I suppose you could look at this as a way that you actually achieve that. You achieve winning her heart, to follow the story, I suppose, is overcoming the figure of her father, which should be this, you know, in an ideal situation, should be like a good person, a good figure that is a good example and role model in her life, and then you, the suitor, have to live up to that. And I mean, that's a tall order sometimes. Other times, it's not really all that hard to overcome the shadow of a kind of crappy dad, but and that's unfortunate, but you know, that's the way life is sometimes.
For sure. And then if I'm going to keep going with my idea of a Skirnir offering to bring Gerdr from unconsciousness to consciousness, I look at it sort of as one bringing her out of the comforts that her father has provided, the sort of her known area, her protected status, and then beating her and taming her like that. I think that's just life, like beating people down and taming them. And, you know, we have to live within the confines of how life and reality works. We can pretend that certain laws of like physics or whatever, or realities don't exist, but the realities and laws don't actually care whether we believe them or not. That's just how they are. So, and like, it just beats you down, especially when you're unconscious and you think the world is one way, and then you're learning that it is not that way. Like, that does beat you down and crush you. So in some ways, we're also seeing like the threat of like a violent death, which and we've talked about this before, and I think Carl Jung talks about it and Dr. Peterson talks about it, that when you undergo a massive change or some unconscious part of you becomes conscious, it is a death, and it's very painful. And the part of you that dies, you mourn for it, and there's pain and all that terrible stuff that Skirnir here is describing. And I would say, to go with his name, illuminating.
Whoa, that was a good tie-in right at the end there. Dang. I do want to plant the seed that some of what this is saying is what will happen if Gerda, and by extension, a woman in general, does not ever choose to go outside of her protected place and pick a mate. I'm not going to address all of that right now, but to say I want to plant that seed, because some of what we're going to talk about here is not going to make any sense other than just the ramblings of a crazy person. But look at it with that in mind, and I'll circle back into it. That's really the key point of the poem to me. So.
Sounds good. Well, I will continue on then.
Sounds good.
It's going to be verse 27, going all the way to 30?
30.
Yeah, okay. So back to the poem. And this is Skirnir speaking. You will sit forever on an eagle's nest, turned away from the world, looking in at hell. Food will seem as awful to you as the Midgard serpent seems to men. You will be laughed at when you emerge. A giant man will look at you. They'll all stare at you. You'll be better known than Heimdall himself staring out behind your gate. Foolishness and screaming, and pain, unendurable pain. May your tears grow with your sorrow. Sit down, and I will tell you some sad news. I'll double your grief. Monsters will bend you over for the whole unhappy day in Jotunheim. You will crawl every day without choice, without hope, to a hall of frost trolls. You'll weep and never be happy. Your sorrows will make you cry.
Well, that's dark.
Yeah, just when you think like I'm going to beat you and kill your father, and then this.
Yeah, and so some of the direct imagery here, she's going to look at hell, have her eye in chaos. Things are not going to be awesome. We've talked about before, if you put your eye in the known, that's nice. You're in a nice, comfortable place. If you put your eye in the unknown, you're looking out at what's outside of your domain, and you're maybe trying to actually learn something. If you put your eye in chaos, though, probably not going to be great. Probably not going to come out of that sane. And so that's where she's going to end up looking. Then it's some of the imagery here is Heimdall. She'll be staring out into hell, and she'll be better known than Heimdall, who is like the constant watcher of the gods. Like he's sort of known for watching and listening for anything to be happening here. And so she is going to be even more well known than him. Foolishness and screaming, pain, unendurable pain. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to cut to the chase here for what I actually see this, because I don't think there's any usefulness to any of this if it's not rejection of the selection of a mate in general. And I'm making some assumptions here, and I'm trying to jump into a mindset that I have never been a part of myself. I'm a man, but bear with me here. So if she rejects Freyr, who is a symbol of fertility, even if he's a pathetic guy right now. If she rejects across the board in general, this is what happens. She's going to have her eye on chaos. She's never going to be fulfilled. I've seen plenty of, just in general, women being, like articles, for example, of women being unfulfilled with not having found a stable long-term partner, and that's just tearing them up. They have regrets upon regrets. They haven't found someone to settle down with, never got to have children. All this kind of points to the psychological anguish that I think these women must go through if they never choose. And that is the key here. Humans, people, for us, there is female choice. It is not just men going out and having sex with whoever they want to. Even if it might seem like that way, if you have ideas that the world is this patriarchy, this rape culture where, guys can just do whatever they want, sow their seed wherever they want. Society is not set up like that. Society does not valorize rape. Absolutely, it does not. That's reprehensible. It's one of the worst things you can do in society. And there is female choice. That's an evolutionary thing. That's fairly non-controversial, actually, that it's the women who choose their mates, and they generally choose from the top of the dominance hierarchy. And this image of Freyr, the way he is now, is kind of pathetic, but in general, he's this symbol of fertility. So if she refuses to even pick from the top of the dominance hierarchy, which I would say Freyr is, as far as fertility goes, yeah, not going to be great. She's pretty much going to be without a stable partner forever, and without children, without all the things that supposedly women actually want. And I'll say supposedly because I don't know, but that's what I hear. And, I mean, monsters will bend you over all the time. Like, what does that sound like other than a woman trying to fulfill herself through lots of different sexual partners, something like that, or feeling hopeless, you'll never be happy. It's dark imagery, but it seems like a real thing. This is like a picture of what happens if you don't select a mate and just kind of go with it. As bad as that sounds, I don't want to say that is the biologically determined thing that people should do. I mean, some people just aren't lucky and don't get a good situation like that. And those people certainly would live out a horrible existence kind of like this. But, for all of what society values, it's settling for both partners. It's that settling down and all that. So to me, none of this makes sense if it's not something like if Gerd does not choose ever, this is what's going to happen to her.
For sure. And I would like to say, too, that we're definitely generalizing here. And as we usually do, like this, there's we can't cover all the sort of all the different options that can be out there. Because I'm sure we all know someone who, like a woman who lived their whole life, didn't get married, didn't have kids, but, enjoyed life to the very end and that kind of thing. And she may have chosen that too. And I think you're right that choosing is actually the key there, because it's kind of like you can't really make a choice unless you're conscious. So I think that's sort of the crux of it, is if you're making the choice consciously, then you can sort of go either way. But I do think there is something to the idea that, in general, making the choice to find a mate, I guess, I don't know if it's the right choice, but it is sort of the path to happiness. And I mean, for men too, it presents itself in a bit of a different way with men, but I mean, I'm just thinking of the older men that don't make, look at Harvey Weinstein. Just to as of this recording, I think he's going to trial right now. And I guess this means we'll never work in Hollywood, right?
Probably.
But yeah, like just if he goes to on I guess on the male side, like it's sort of just as terrible, with the choices of rape and all that kind of stuff that he's made. The consequences for him will hopefully be awful. Probably not awful enough, but
yeah, the place for rapists is eternally getting venom dripped onto you. Oh,
that's right.
Right? So does not like rapists. The Norse people do not like rapists.
No, and actually I remember in the Germania by Tacitus, he talks about, I guess how I think rapists and adulterers were dealt with swiftly, but I think that if you read between the lines, in our age, I think if you're reading it, in Rome back in the day, this would have been pretty clear. It means they kill you. Like it's not there isn't a big to do about it. It's just they're going to kill you. So no, they didn't take kindly to this. I don't know. I don't really know how we got onto that, but just about terribleness in life and monsters bending you over.
Yeah. Do you want to read through the next little?
Yeah, let's do it, and then we can. Because it keeps getting bad, and it
just keeps going.
It just keeps going. Like it's crazy, actually, just how long it goes on about. Like
it's like a third of the poem, a quarter.
Yeah,
it's like a quarter of the poem.
And this part is sort of known as the curses that Skirnir is putting upon Gerda if she rejects his offer for Frey. So 31 to 34. Back to the poem, and again, this is Skirnir speaking. You'll have a 3-headed giant for your husband, or go without a husband. You'll go crazy and rot with illness. You'll be like a fat thistle ripped halfway off its stalk and left to dry. I went to a forest to get a young tree branch to find a magic wand there. I found a magic wand there. Odin will rage at you. Thor will rage at you. Frey will hate you, you evil girl. You have earned the hatred of the gods. Hear me, giants. Hear me, frost trolls. Hear me, fire trolls. Hear me, gods. I curse this girl. I curse her. Never to know a man's love. Never to have a husband.
Yeah, more dark. First of all, I'll just say that in the middle there, good for you, Skirnir. You went to a forest and found a magic wand. Good for you, buddy. I think that's actually like there's probably some symbolism to it, but it's just odd. It's oddly placed there. You know what I mean? I went to a forest to get a young tree branch to find a magic wand. I found a magic wand. Yay! Good for you. So talk about having like a 3-headed giant for a husband or going without a husband. I think that's actually the most profound bit here. I think it's something like if you don't choose a good mate, either a mate is going to be chosen for you or you won't get one at all. And like a 3-headed giant, I mean, that almost sounds like the example of a man that doesn't have his priorities on straight, isn't devoted to his family, maybe goes and sleeps around, something like that, like low quality. That's what that says to me. And I mean, for all of this, for cursing, you'll never know a man's love, never have a husband. I mean, again, I think that just dials into this resentment thing, this whole rejection, resentment, anger, whatever. But this is really, really on the nose, I think, where it's like, yeah, if you don't pick, it might get picked for you. You know what I mean? Like maybe desperation gets to the level of you'll go for a 3-headed giant type man or go without in general. And it puts the two on the same level where neither one is better than the other. And I mean, I think you could definitely say that there are situations where situations of abuse where it's significantly would have been better to not have gone in with a three-headed giant, but going without for some people could be just as psychologically damaging. I don't want to trivialize anything. Definitely don't want to trivialize anything, but still it's kind of that particular line is kind of on the nose,
Definitely, I thought the exact same thing actually, that about how on the nose would be, and I think the first stanza 31 here particularly pertains to women, although men too. You just have to change it around a little bit, but it's sort of like if you choose to remain unconscious, then either the person that you match up with is going to be awful, as you were saying, or you won't match up with anyone. And I like the image of the fat thistle ripped halfway off the stalk. It's kind of like there was potential there, but now it's gone. And again, if you choose to remain unconscious, there is that potential with consciousness that isn't there when you're unconscious, and it will go away if you choose to remain unconscious. And then, yeah, I didn't know what to make with the going into the forest to get the tree branch for the magic wand. I wonder if it's one of those things where if you were hearing the story, you'd know exactly what that was, because of course that's how magic wands are made. But for us, it's kind of obscure. But I do think there is something to do, or something important with the magic that generally, as we've seen, sort of the archetype of magic is speaking true words and forming things with words. Because right after we have the curse, like the gods cursing and raging at her, and then basically existence raging at her. And I think when you're in a situation where you're unconscious, I think it can feel like that, where, especially if you aren't taking personal responsibility, yeah, it's going to feel like these outside forces are just playing with you and you can't do anything. And, from the gods right down to, fire trolls and things like that, like everything is working against you and you don't know why, and you can't fix it. And I think that's sort of the ultimate cost of remaining unconscious, is that everything is happening to you from every direction and you don't know why, and you don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, that's quite something right there. No, you know what you said about the magic wand, and then speaking true words, that I think is important. And I mean, the nuance I get with these curses is maybe something like, okay, on the one hand, it's directly, here's a curse, I don't like you anymore, here's a curse. But it's also like, here are the semi-direct things that will happen. And maybe this is kind of right where it's like, this is how you get enlightened if you actually listen to these things, which maybe you could explain some of the rest of the story here. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. Well, like I said with the other one, like a few verses ago, sort of, he's illuminating the pain of unconsciousness, but also the pain of moving from unconsciousness to like this. Going through this would not have been fun. So, yeah, it's painful having things brought to light,
and then maybe more concretely illuminating the consequences on a broad level of not going with a mate, sort of thing.
For
right?
sure.
And I mean, I don't mean to be kind of clinical or anything like that with the terminology like that. That's what I mean, is like, if you don't match up with someone and you don't choose to match up with someone from both sides, that's not going to be great for your life overall long term.
No. And if we look at Frey sort of as the symbol and what Frey represents, rather than this kind of pathetic, cringy person in this story, like Frey is fertility and prosperity and sort of that natural cycle of life. And I think you said it earlier, like, if you were to just reject that out of hand, like that, like, what are you doing? Like, you're trying to get rid of any biological urges that you might have. Like, I think if you wanted to torture yourself, that is one of the best ways to do it, is to just like to go without satisfying the biological urges. Like, this is going to be, again, flippant. So I have no idea if this is sort of has any real relation, but I'm just thinking of like monks who take like the vow of chastity. Well, what do they do instead? Will they make alcohol or like cheese? Like, so they either eat or get drunk. Maybe not, but
Right.
yeah, but no, just like, how are you going to deal with not, being chaste? Well, I'm going to eat or get drunk.
Yeah, and who's to
Perpetually.
say when they're drunk? Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind. That's all I have for this section, and more because we're not even done.
No, there's more. Okay, so this is stanza 35 and 36. Thankfully, we're coming to the end of the curses, but they don't. It's not like he's going to get better by the end. Like, it's not. It's still. He's just digging deeper. So this is Skirnir again, verse 35. Back to the poem. Hrimgrimnir's the name of the troll who will take you down below the gates of hell. There below the tree roots, servants will bring you goat's urine to drink. You will never get anything better to drink. Not if you want it, girl. Not even if I want it, girl. I curse you with that troll and 3 other curses: sexual shame and madness and unbearable suffering. I've cursed you already, but I'll call off the curses if you give me good reason.
Now, isn't that just graphic and nasty and not nice at all?
Not at all.
The goat's urine, I think, is a contrast to the goat who makes mead from its udders in Valhalla, which is supposed to be awesome. That's from its udders, though. That's not goat's piss. so she's getting like the exact opposite of this awesome mead. She's getting piss, and that's like,
Exactly. She's literally getting the opposite of the best tasting thing in all the 9 worlds. She's getting the opposite. So it's the worst tasting thing.
and
It's all she gets.
it's all she gets. And not even if I want to give you something better, like that's so crazy. It's like, this is like just the culmination of a crazy, twisted, resentful mind here. And I mean, I think you can just read this coming out of a really, really bad chat log on the internet of some guy who is just really, really unhappy that the girl he's talking to is rejecting him. It's like, hi there. Why are you ignoring me? I curse you to drink goat's urine forever.
No, exactly. That's exactly it. It's amazing that, however long after this is written, well, not written down, but recited and shared amongst people around a campfire, that you can see the exact same thing on the internet. You don't have to look far into Reddit to find it. And God forbid if you go into 4chan. I mean,
Don't go there.
don't go there.
Or no,
Or
don't
do,
go.
yeah.
Don't go there. Go on Reddit. It's
Yeah. But yeah, it just captures that resentment and that entitlement and sort of the darkest part of, a rejected man. No, in some ways I'd call it like actual art, because it captures something that's real. And it's just ugly, ugly art.
No. I mean, like, absolutely, it's abusive. It's threatening. It's not like this is not how any man should behave. I wouldn't even call this a man for the words he's saying. This is like a pathetic little waste of space.
Absolutely.
And I mean, sexual shame, madness, unbearable suffering. Like, no, come on. Like, no man is wishing that on anyone, right? Like, it's no proper
No, exactly.
man who deserves the term. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I'll bring up, so Hrimgrimnir, the name means frost face, which is kind of cool. And just like the things that he does. But again, I would argue that this is also sort of things that will happen if you remain unconscious. So sexual shame, if you don't ever grow a proper sense of identity around your sexuality, shame is kind of the only other response you can have. Like you will be ashamed of yourself. And I know Freud says something to the effect of one sexual identity is the foundation of your identity or something like that. Like it's very interwoven into who you are. And it's funny because especially in our culture, we don't talk about it a lot. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying that's sort of how it is. We don't really express our sexual identities out in public. Even like with friends, it's usually with your partner. So there is actually like a lot of opportunity for shame there. And then madness and unbearable suffering. Well, if you're unconscious, you're suffering all the time and you have no idea why. Life just isn't fair. And yeah, that of course is going to cause madness, like actual madness. You will go crazy over that.
No, this parallel underlying symbolism to the underlying symbolism is really, really spot on. I think it definitely, not only does it fit, it's almost a better fit than all of this about the relation to men and women and all of that's going on here. Certainly that layer makes it less cringy.
Well, a little bit.
It doesn't make it less cringy, the actual words and all that, but the message, maybe. Yeah,
I think you've been totally right. Because this is exactly how, a terrible man would behave. Like it's so spot on that has to be part of it. And I myself, like figuring out how the two work together, because for all the bad stuff that Skirnir is doing, that's like bringing enlightenment or whatever. But I would never want anyone I know to go through that kind of thing in the name of enlightenment or becoming conscious or anything like that. So
it's symbolic, and I wouldn't want them to go through that in the name of love either.
No, exactly.
So I'm gonna move on if you are.
Yeah, let's. For me, this was like the twist. So we're going to be going to, verse 37 to 39. So Skirnir is done cursing and Gerdr is going to respond. Gerdr says, "Be welcome here instead, and take this drinking horn, full of good ancient mead. Even if I previously said that I would never marry that god of the Vanir." Skirnir said, "I want to know my errands complete before I ride away. Tell me when you'll meet the noble son of Newerth. When will you come to comfort Frey?" Gerdr said, "There's a grove named Barry. We both know it. A peaceful place in the forest. After 9 nights, Frey, son of Newerth, will enjoy my love there."
All right. So here's the twist. She, after all that, agrees to marry Frey. How in the heck does she think that's a good idea? And I just want to say right here to anyone thinking that big diatribe is actually going to result in that in real life, no, it's not. No, it's darn well not going to result in this. It's symbolic. Okay? It's symbolic. So, sealing all of this with hospitality just on a kind of a mundane level with the drink and all that, agreeing to the marriage, like that's mundane on the one hand, but it's also, there's an idea that drinking especially old ancient mead together, that's like sealing fates together and making an agreement and all that. But why the heck would she do that? You know, like that's it's almost unfathomable. It's almost unbelievable that would happen, right? Like it goes beyond a twist. Why would anyone in their right mind do that?
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to boo. Like, this doesn't... When I first read it, I was just like, oh, come on, guys. How am I supposed to make a podcast about this story without, like, that means anything that I want to put out there?
No, agreed, because again, this is... I'm going to say the symbolism I take out of this is meaningful, but on the face of its story... seems to be ammunition for the sort of guys who might think this is a good idea. All that's just preceded here is a good idea. It's not a good idea. Don't do this. Now, the symbolic level, if it's okay to go there already here, I mean, if we haven't emphasized enough that this is just not great. So I take this as... she has understood what's going on a symbolic level here and is actually deciding to make the choice. Now, the fact that she's making the choice with Freyr, on the one hand, the symbolic, fertile god of agriculture, that's a pretty good choice. This whiny little guy who makes threats via his friend, less good. But I see this as, first of all, symbolic of kind of intentionally making that choice, which is a good thing, but also of the concept of monogamy in general as a societal check on this sort of violent jerk behavior, is to sort of say that, okay, women don't just get to choose the guy at the top. 14 women get to choose that one guy. We're going to have one man to one woman, and then they're both out of the pool. And then it can go down the dominance hierarchy beyond that, and the result is that more men end up with women, because the reality is sort of that, well, women can end up with a man if they want to, but it's not the reverse for men. Men cannot just end up with a woman because they want to. And the societal norm of monogamy results in more men getting hooked up with a woman, and then they become less like this. That's the only symbolism I can draw from this that's in any way positive.
Actually, that's interesting that you mentioned that, because married men, their levels of testosterone drop significantly. And it really is, monogamy really is like a check on men to sort of stop them from competing constantly for women. And, well, could you imagine society? Like, I mean,
they exist.
Even with that, no, they absolutely exist for sure. And even with that in our society, like, it works okay. It's not like it's not great. I mean, we still see men, acting like, I think they're usually dogs or pigs because they just go after anything. Like, that's usually what they're likened to. But yeah. And they're not, I guess in high school you might have that double standard, although I usually saw it, if a girl sleeps around, she's a slut. But if a man or a guy in high school sleeps around, he's a hero. But I think that might exist only in high school, because after a while, like, it gets pretty icky. And like most men that I know, like, and men who deserve to be called men, they look at that and you're just like, no, that's gross, on both sides. But like a man who's 50 and still sleeping around, you're kind of, you realize there's a lack there. There's something missing there that, yeah, it's not, let's say it's, as Dr. Peterson would say, it's not optimal, not an optimal way of living.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got biological foundations. The reason why society labels women as sluts if they sleep around is because they could result in a child that they don't know who the father is. And there's actually some societies, especially in the Amazon, that practice I forget what the term is, but it's essentially a woman will have relations with multiple men, not know who the child is, but all the men sort of, they act like the father sort of thing. And it's semi-stable to a degree, but it also results in a lot of jealousy and a lot of flakiness. Like you could, well, from the idea of not exactly knowing that this is your kid or not, there's, and I think there's some research, anthropological research done into those societies where it turns into like, yeah, that's one way to go. But if the child has one or two fathers, they're much more likely to be in a stable situation. But if it's like 3 or 4 or more, and even I think beyond 4, it's like in a lot of these, that's a little too over the line sort of thing. If it's 3 or 4, it's much more likely for the situation to be unstable. And yeah, so there's some research done into kind of that side of things. But my point, I think, was that if the men do not know that is their child, they're not going to go and support the mother. And so the woman who has, had relations with multiple men might end up with a child that no one will claim. And that's a negative, because that's a huge burden. And that's something that, without some outside help can be basically daunting and impossible almost to handle, right? But then the flip side is the men want to be as biologically successful as they want. And by that, I mean to have as many children as humanly possible, biologically. Society has gone and said that's not great. That's not optimal. And again, monogamy is the kind of counter. That's the societal counter to that biological urge, which seems to have worked out in a lot of stable societies. Polygamy still exists in the world, and there's a lot of conflict, a lot of turmoil in those places. And a big reason is because it leaves a lot of young, frustrated, violent men who have almost no possibility of getting a mate. And actually, one way, I think it's Boko Haram that does this, they promise wives to their fighters. So they'll go and just take girls and, well, basically force them to become wives for these men who might not have had a prospect of that anyway. And they commit violent, terrible, reprehensible acts in the name of basically getting their rocks off. And it's
for sure
not great.
No, I know in China as well, because of their one-child policy and their, I don't know what you call it, but their preference for male children. There aren't enough girls for the young men there. Like they don't match up anymore. Whereas I think in the West, we usually say it's pretty 50-50 in terms of population, male, female.
And men just have a tendency to die more. So there ends up being more, just slightly, yeah, women than men. Whereas
like a place like China, it's a lot more skewed, and they're having a huge problem with crime now because as I said, men who are in relationships and married, their testosterone goes down.
And maybe on that, I think that is a symbol of the sword being, Freyr giving up his sword is eventually that's the symbol. He gives that up in order to get a mate. You have to give up your virility, your testosterone, whatever, your baser male instincts in order to get a mate, which is sort of the ultimate goal society-wise.
For sure. And if we weren't so far into the poem, I would try and think what that means in terms of fighting Surtur, but I think those are thoughts for another time. Oh,
well, my thought on that is just that a married man is in general possibly less capable, on fighting chaos and not kind of having that with you, not having that martial ability honed, right? That's all I can think of on that. Certainly some married guys, us being some of them, put some work into martial craft and being capable and strong and all that. But, I could see that as being what it is. You lose that that warrior spirit sometimes.
For sure. Yeah. It's something I'll have to think about more. But like, I definitely like where you're going with that. I think there's definitely something there.
That was my symbolic takeaway from this. So I hope you have something from your thread that makes her.
I think she is accepting to become conscious and to go through the pain and become conscious. However, and I like this, I think she's making sure that the force that will make her conscious will undergo its own trial, which is the 9 nights without her. And I actually think that is something for, if I was a woman, I would take that away as like a good idea, that if you have a man that you're interested in, make him sacrifice something, even if it's just, his lust, like let him cool down a bit before, you kiss him or whatever you kids do these days.
And I think that is the idea though, right? Like once you say yes, but you have to wait a little while, that's actually going to have a cooling effect. I think that's the idea, isn't it? Like it shouldn't be to work you up even more. It's like, okay. I just got to wait now. It's, and I mean, even on that level, I think that's what it's getting at, is like, you have to prove that it's worth waiting that amount of time. You know what I mean?
For sure. And that you're worthy enough to wait that amount of time, that you have that self-control. So,
right. Now, when it comes together like this, where, again, on the face of it, narrative-wise, this is a crappy story. But for her to just agree at the end of the day on that, like, I mean, that is definitely not anything that I think any of the women in my life would be happy with or do, right? But when you take it to the symbolic and the metaphorical level, then we actually get into something that is worthwhile and makes sense, which, is either, to my eyes, like monogamy as a societal construct, and the creation of that is sort of what I get out of this. And maybe just one more point about that is that this is the active role of women in this system. Like, I think this is saying something like, it must have been, not must, that's too strong a word, but it might have been women who were actively making this choice that monogamy was a better way to go. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. I could see that for sure. Like you were saying before with the taking care of children, like, why would a man stick around, right? It's hard enough for the mother to stick around. Like kids are wonderful and all that, but they're also like loud and demand everything, and they're completely helpless for, the first basically 2 years of their life. So no, it's a tall order. It's a hard task. And if given the option, if a man was seeing all these other men taking care of you, why would he? Like, it doesn't make biological sense, really. It is irrational.
Right. And I think it turns into, this is how society as a whole, but very specifically saying that women are playing an active role in this. So this isn't just like the oppressive patriarchy saying that there has to be monogamy. This is also like both sides are saying that this is a good thing and agreeing to it. And it's almost like one of those things, like, I guess societal constructs in general are just that people in general agreeing to abide by certain rules to make something better. It's agreeing to sacrifice as a whole, as a group, in order to gain some benefit. And the benefit here is less of these jerks who are going around cursing women. Less of that.
Exactly.
And that's, I get a 1-to-1 correlation with him finishing that up and then her agreeing as sort of saying, this is how we diffuse that. That is the causation that I get out of that. Just having them like bam, bam, not even like sort of because maybe in a Shakespeare play there would be a monologue from the women's perspective about like the all the grief that she's going through after having had this curse put upon her, sort of like that. But here, this direct one-to-one thing is sort of like, here's how society is going to deal with this situation.
Yeah. You know what? I hadn't thought of that before, but no, I definitely see that. And I think one small thing before I move on to the end of the poem, they talk about going to the grove named Berry, and that simply means either, actually there's two possibilities, and it's kind of interesting because they're not sure which, but either like a grove of coniferous trees, so pine trees, or an island of barley.
Ooh.
Yeah, and they're not sure which one it means.
Hold on to that island of barley. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. No. So like, hold on to that meaning.
Okay.
It's a good one.
Oh, interesting.
Just wait.
Okay, I'm excited now. All I was going to say was that both of them are important. Groves of trees were often used as religious and sacred space. So a lot of rituals, for example, marriages and interaction with the gods, would take place there.
Yeah, sacred space is a huge concept in general in these older religions, where it's like, this is a space that is meant to emulate the sacred. It's supposed to be a place of the sacred in this otherwise mundane, profane world that does not actively interact with the sacred. If you want to know more about the sacred and the profane, I would direct you to the book by Mircea Eliade called The Sacred and the Profane. I'll include a link.
Absolutely. It explains everything about sacred space and mundane space and all that kind of stuff.
Much better than I possibly could.
All right, so I'll be finishing up the poem here. There's just a line of prose and then stanzas 40 to 42. So back to the poem. Then Skirnir rode home. Frey stood waiting for him and asked for the news. Tell me, Skirnir, before you unsaddle that horse, before you take one more step, what did you accomplish in Jotunheim for your or my purposes? Skirnir said, There's a grove named Berry. We both know it. A peaceful place in the forest. After 9 nights, Frey, son of Newerth, will enjoy Gareth's love there. Frey said, 1 night would be long enough. 2 would be worse. How can I contain my lust for 3? A month has often seemed shorter to me than half such a marriage night.
So, okay, we're concluding the story here, and Frey gets his news, and even then he's not even satisfied with the yes. He's like, oh man, how am I going to wait this long? The numbering here, he only goes up to 3. That's apparently significant in that was the length of time that they would actually make a couple wait to consummate their marriage. I think Larrington makes note of that. Maybe I'm getting the detail wrong, but I think that's what he might be referring to. Like they wait 3 days sort of thing, and that would be hard, and maybe it's the same sort of sacrifice sort of deal, but I don't know. I think the point is that might be what he's referencing, which is separate from 9, which is a sacred number and really a catch-all for, I think 9 means that the task has been completed sufficiently. You know what I mean? Like, because it's that holy number if you get to that number anyway. But yeah, just capping that off, right? And Frey is still kind of whiny and not coming off great.
No, for sure. And going back to that idea of 9, I think that's the amount of time that Odin spent hanging on the tree to get the runes, which I would also liken to becoming conscious. And so I think what we're seeing here is Gerda's like, okay, if I'm going to accept consciousness, well, Frey has to as well. It can't be this sort of unconscious, unintegrated garbage that he's spewing here. Yeah, so for me, I see a pretty strong thread of going from the unconscious to the conscious and having to accept all that it entails, and seeing the sort of the downside to remaining unconscious, but also the pain of becoming conscious. So
yeah, and then to me again, this whole story I think is also being an interplay between just how men and women interact and how society has kind of dealt with romance in general and dealt with, you know, these ultra aggressive kind of more violent men but with also the flip side of kind of this longing and this really negative emotions and these negative consequences that can be felt by someone who doesn't choose to eventually go with someone, to go with a good mate. So it's a flip side. This goes into actually a really negative side to both men and women, or to really aggressive people and people who just do not decide to go ahead and make the choice to kind of match up with someone. It's like, if you're this ultra aggressive person, you're repugnant, you're repulsive. And if you don't decide to go and be with someone and find a match, you know, you're going to be unfulfilled in your whole life and just going through life trying to fill that void somehow. Maybe you get a 3-headed giant as a husband, or no husband at all. And I really do think these can be generalized into not just men and women, but into men and women specifically, but to just people in general. If you go and kind of take that tact at life, neither one is good. And the societal answer to that is monogamy and encouraging people to kind of come together like that. And that's what I get out of the poem as the symbolic arc here, on a different level from your, you know, consciousness and enlightenment thing, which I always think is pretty darn great. So
yeah, well, I think it really works on both those levels, and I think that's why there's a lot of truth here, because, and I've said this before too, whenever we find these things that work on these multiple levels, like, you know, there's something to it because it does work on these multiple levels, and you know, you can sort of go up and down it sort of from the micro to the macro and see that actually, yeah, this works everywhere. So there's probably something to it.
You want another level?
I do.
A macro level?
Always.
So this poem, after all that, if you've been keeping your eye on the symbols, what these names mean, and what some of these words have meant, Skirnir, shining one, and then eventually here at the end, Bari as island of barley. So this could be an allegory to the Freyr is as a symbol of fertility. This is an allegory for the spring, as in the thawing of the world after the winter. Frey is in, you know, not a great situation, but he's sending the sun to Gerdr, who is a symbol of the earth, to thaw her out, to take her out from her protected place, but to make her fertile in order to produce the crops and the harvest.
Wow.
So there we go. Just one last level there as a possibility. This isn't just me. This is like, there's some scholarly, what's the word? Debate isn't what I'm looking
commentary?
for. Yeah. That this is very possibly an allegory to that, with Freyr as this fertility symbol and the constant feminine symbol of the earth, as he is sort of sending the sun to go make her fertile after the winter. And then he can go fertilize her, and then we get barley.
For sure.
So there we go. That's what I wanted to end on, as sort of the tying together of what all of these could be as an allegory as well. But of course, we found all this other symbolic meaning, which is just always awesome.
Definitely.
Do not follow this story as a guide for how to live your romantic life, though.
No, do not. You're a terrible person if you do. I have no problem saying that. You're a terrible person if you do.
And hopefully you followed along with us with our disgust at the actions of Skirnir, and possibly by extension Freyr, his words, all the things that he did here. Repulsive. Hopefully you followed along with that and are of the same opinion. I really
Absolutely.
hope so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember hearing some guys say that the men who do this type of thing deserve all the worst things that could possibly happen to them. And then he just sort of like quietly added in jail. And you're like, okay, I know where that's going. So I'm of the same opinion though. Like anyone who looks at this and is like, yeah, I'm going to do that. You probably deserve all the worst things that could happen to you in jail.
Agreed.
Excellent.
And with that,
yeah, I think that sort of brings the poem to a close. Again, we were using the Poetic Edda, translated by Jackson Crawford. So a big thank you to him and to Hackett Publishing for letting us use this book. And then we've got our normal things that we say at the end of the episode about where you can reach us. So there's Northern Myths on Facebook, at Northern Myths Podcast on Twitter.
that's Instagram.
Oh, Instagram, that's right. At Northern Myths Podcast Instagram, at Northern Myth. We're at Northern
At
Myths.
Northern Myths for Twitter, and North Myth Luke and North Myth Dan.
That's right.
For Twitter, personal accounts. And we're also on YouTube if you're just listening to the podcast here. Check us out there. We're doing some cool things, hoping to build back up with the clip library there. Please do subscribe and please do share as well. It's a big help. If you liked our show and you know some people or a group or anything like that who might enjoy what we've been doing, we love to connect with people, and if you can share us with more folks, we'd really appreciate that. And please do connect with us on Facebook, Twitter. Love to get in contact with people. For the most part, we can respond to every comment we get these days because we're still not a big deal or anything yet.
Yeah.
So, and not experts too, by the way. We do have to always say that as well. So
yeah, if you disagree with us, be sure to let us know. If you have more information to add or like to shed on some of the things we've said, absolutely do it, because we're doing this because we're learning sort of in front of each other and talking about it so that we can learn it better. So the more input, the better, really.
Exactly. And just in case, before we forget or anything like that, just a thank you to Jordan Peterson as well, because we wouldn't be doing the show without his inspiration, especially his work on his biblical series, his lectures of biblical series, as well as his university lectures on maps of meaning and all that. So we'll link to his YouTube channel and to his website for his list of recommended reading if you want to learn more about his work. So
for sure. And I think the only other thing I'll say is that two other things, but the first one is that if you want to tell people where you can find us, we're now on Spotify as well as iHeartRadio, and then of course iTunes, Podbean, Google Play, sort of any other podcasting service that you can find. You should be able to find us on that.
We think we're on pretty much everything now, and YouTube as well, obviously. So. And a subscribe would really help on the YouTube, by the way. If you go check out our YouTube page, a subscribe would be highly appreciated. So please do that if you get the chance.
And share, review on iTunes, all that kind of stuff. All of that helps us out. And I think that about covers that. So I will leave us with I guess it's our sign off now. It's paraphrasing Carl Jung to find out the myth that you're living. And that does it for us at Northern Myths Podcast. Thank you very much.